Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard. Today I'll be taking a look at three third-party controllers that are, shall we say, inspired by first-party designs. And before we go on, I will add that I've purchased all of these controllers with my own hard-earned money, and all of the opinions you're about to hear are entirely my own. The three controllers that will be covered today are the PowerA Xbox Wired Controller, the Matricom Gpad XYBA, and the 8bitdo SN30 Pro. Or is it 8bitdo? I'm not sure. How about you? Anyway, bring in! First out of the gate is this PowerA Xbox Wired Controller. Why did I get such a thing? Well, it's handy to have an X-input device around for modern PC games and software that doesn't need any real configuration. As the name says, this one is wired only, which is fine for my purposes, and I got it for a whopping $20, which sources tell me is significantly less money than the $50 to $60 they charge for an official controller. How does it compare to an official controller? Overall, pretty well, but it's got a few notable differences. First off, this doesn't have the heft of an official controller, even one without batteries in it. As an aside, really Microsoft? Still with the AA batteries? Come on! First, the bad news. The analog sticks feel tighter and cheaper than those on a real controller, and have somewhat sharp edges on their texture. They aren't terrible, but they clearly aren't the quality of the original. Then we have the Gamepad. I like the feel of the Gamepad on this device better than the official Xbox One controller, but all is not well in Gamepad town. It's fine for the vast majority of games you throw at it, however there's a special case that I had particular trouble with that we'll talk about in a few moments. If you're used to an official Xbox One controller, you'll feel right at home with the shape of this one. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the shape. I find the L and R bumper is a little bit uncomfortable to get to. The rest of the controller is perfectly fine, however. The main and control buttons feel fine, and the analog triggers feel great. Here's some gameplay footage I recorded while using the PowerA Xbox One wired controller on my PC. I tested this controller with quite a few classic and modern games. For Super Street Fighter on the SNES here, this controller was definitely not the best. I had a lot of trouble pulling off dragon punches, but only when facing to the right. I didn't have this problem at all when facing left. I think part of the problem is just how flat this D-pad is. It may also not quite be balanced right, but I wasn't going to take it apart and mess with it. Mostly, I came away pretty impressed with this PowerA controller. Third-party console controllers have a terrible reputation, and honestly, they've worked very hard over the years to earn that terrible reputation. This controller really shows that cheaper alternatives to official first-party controllers can actually be pretty good. I feel the level of quality on this controller for its $20 asking price is more than acceptable. Next up, we have the Matricom Gpad XYBA. I know what you're thinking. Hey moron, that's a GameSir G3 controller. What is this, a knockoff of a knockoff? Funny story about that. You see, I have 5 of these controllers. I ended up having to take one apart to clean it because my kids spilled something in it. And what did I find inside that lovely controller? Why, a GameSir circuit board. So what's the difference between this and an official GameSir controller then? I'd say usually about 10 to 30 bucks. I got my first one of these for $10 on sale a few years ago. The others I've purchased were all either $15 or $20. The Gpad XYBA, and by the way, what a catchy name, is really a bit of an ode to the PS4's DualShock 4. No, it doesn't have the touchpad, but the buttons are laid out similarly, and the silhouette of the controller is nearly identical, as is the feel. Honestly, this may be the most comfortable controller to hold and reach all the buttons on that I currently use. I use one of these on my Shield TV permanently, and one for my PC, and the other 3 belong to my kids. You can use these controllers either wired or over Bluetooth, and I've never had trouble pairing them to anything. Now, one special circumstance to be aware of is that they've slightly updated this model over time, and they may not all support the same system configurations. For example, some may not have computer mouse mode, some may not support iOS, and things like that. All the ones I have, at minimum, support D input and X input, so they do work with basically all modern hardware. Switching between the various modes of operation like D input or X input is also slightly different depending on your controller revision, but it's always a combination of 2 buttons. Usually you'll hold either the home button and a face button or select and a face button. I must point out that I am now having an issue with my very first one of these controllers, which is about 3 years old now. It started out infrequently, but occurs a little more often these days. Sometimes when I use it via Bluetooth, it just loses the connection and becomes unresponsive. I can't even power it down. The way that you fix this is by grabbing a pin or a paper clip and inserting it into the tiny reset hole on the back of the controller. Now, I will stress again that this problem only occurs on my first and oldest of the 5 controllers of this type that I own. Now, here's some gameplay footage of me using the Matricom Gpad XYBA. I've used this controller with many native PC and Android games as well as emulated games over the years. The D-pad is a little bit low and smaller than a DualShock 4, but I actually prefer it to Sony's slightly broken up D-pad. The analog sticks feel absolutely great. The buttons are also excellent. As you can see from this footage, it has no problem allowing me to execute Super Street Fighter moves with ease. And while I haven't measured it to the frame or anything like that, I don't notice any severe input lag in either Bluetooth or wired modes. If you can find this controller in the $10 to $20 range, which is typically what it costs, I think that it's absolutely worth having, and a great choice for multi-purpose gaming, meaning a combination of new, old, and emulation.
Confirmed huge light force on the radar. Option, speed up.
Finally, we have another 8bitdo controller, the SN30 Pro Gamepad. I've had it for roughly about 2 years or so now, and I'm covering it here today since it fits the theme of the episode and is still actually sold brand new. You may have seen a lot of information on this controller and videos in the last couple of years and want to know how it holds up after some extensive playtime. Well, I'm here to tell you. Let me begin by saying that I do like this controller, but it's got its share of issues. The first of which is something of an awkward layout. Squeezing analog joysticks and extra shoulder buttons onto a controller that is still roughly the same size as an SNES pad makes things a bit uncomfortable. The upper L and R triggers can also be a little tough to press without hitting the lower triggers, either instead of or at the same time. And I have medium-sized hands, so if you've got giant meat mitts with thick sausage fingers, this could be a real problem for you. The analog sticks feel solid, if a little bit tight. The rubber used on them doesn't feel too great after a couple of years, though. Feels like it's been rotting away, and they are not pleasant to touch anymore. And I did not store this thing in any extreme conditions at any point. Compared to a real SNES gamepad, the D-pad feels worse. It's a bit clicky and doesn't have the same level of give as the genuine article. The buttons also don't feel like an authentic SNES controller when you press them down. The click is a bit too hard. You can use this controller over Bluetooth or USB-C. I bought it initially because of the Nintendo Switch support, so I would have enough controllers for me and the kids to play multiplayer games together. As a Switch controller, it's handy, but it's not great as a primary controller as you can't power the system on with it. At least it does have the extra necessary navigation buttons. And response time is fine, any lag is minor and completely acceptable. One other thing I'll mention about my SN30 Pro is that it doesn't work the way it's supposed to anymore, and it hasn't for quite some time. I can no longer change input modes, it's stuck in Nintendo Switch mode. Bluetooth stays on when the controller is turned off. Even if I turn it off manually, it'll just search for connections forever until the battery dies, basically. This was a known problem on lower firmwares. And yeah, there are firmwares that the company put out to correct it, but guess what? I tried to update the firmware and I can't. You know why? Because it won't let me put the controller into firmware update mode either. It's still stuck in switch mode. Don't! Here's some footage of me playing a couple of games using the SN30 Pro. The performance of the controller is generally fine. I've used it pretty extensively on my Switch, and put in some time with it on my PC as well. As I mentioned before, any input lag is pretty minor even when using it over Bluetooth, and even with the clicky D-pad, it's pretty easy to pull off complicated motions like the special attacks in Super Street Fighter 2 here. I'm completely satisfied with how it handles. Still, despite that, I just can't recommend it because of all the problems I've had with mine. Honestly, it was so bad it almost put me off 8bitdo forever, but I'm glad I took a chance on their Genesis-inspired M30, because that controller is way better than this one, and I've never had a single problem with it. So yeah, this is a bit of an older controller like the XYBA, but while I still use that one, I don't really use this one anymore because of all of its issues. So, if you could only get one of these controllers, which one would I recommend? I would say based on versatility, value, durability, and ease of use, I would have to go with the Matricom Gpad XYBA. It's a great general-purpose controller that works across a wide variety of platforms. It feels great in your hand, has a solid D-pad, excellent analog sticks, excellent buttons, and despite my one reset issue that I mentioned with my oldest of the 5 of these that I own, they've held up great over the years. I will also say that the PowerA Xbox One Wired Controller is a fine choice if you're looking to play primarily modern games. It is really nice to have something that, you just plug in and it actually works. What holds this one back a little bit are the less than stellar analog sticks and the somewhat problematic D-pad. Because of these things, it's really not so great for retro games, but as a general purpose modern controller, it's still pretty good. And now we have drawn to the close of another video, my friends. What's your favorite not quite first party controller? Go ahead and discuss it in the comments. With that, I will say, thanks for watching, and see me later.